Welcome to the Law School Insider, where we have conversations with students, lawyers, and employers.
Succeeding in law school is something that you must prepare for, not only before you begin, but throughout your law school journey, and that's what this podcast is all about. I am your host, Dr. Christopher Lewis, and I will draw from my over 20 years of experience in the college admission field, as well as bring forth the experiences of others as we delve deeper into the issues. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Law School Insider. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Lewis, and I am so excited to have you back this week. This week we have an amazing guest with us. We are bringing you Judge Richard Suhrheinrich, who is a judge with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, serving in Lansing, Michigan. And it has been my pleasure getting to know him over the years, but it is even my greater pleasure to bring him to you and let him share his success with you and also his journey with you. Judge Suhrheinrich, thanks so much for being on the show this week.
I'm delighted.
Judge Suhrheinrich, you've been in your profession for many years and you've had many different experiences. But let's go back to the beginning and talk about those initial steps and the reasoning behind your decision to become a lawyer. You know, what was it? What was it about the law that intrigued you and that really made you want to become a part of this profession?
I've always wanted to be a lawyer. I was born in a house without running water in southern Indiana in a place called Lincoln City. It's where Abraham Lincoln lived from age 7 to 21, and his mother is buried about a block from the house I was born in. My folks moved to Detroit when I was an infant, but so I was raised in Detroit. But I was sent back there to Indiana every summer for a number of years to stay with my grandmother. And I became very interested in Abraham Lincoln and thinking if he could do it from humble beginnings, that is, be a lawyer, I could too. And so I had the right, I think, attributes. I love to read. I read a lot. And as Abraham Lincoln said, if you want to be a lawyer, you have to read, read, read. And those two things went together, and that's why I became a lawyer.
Now, as I said, I know that you have had quite the experience base behind you to get you to where you are today because, you know, as we were talking beforehand, a person that's just a lawyer isn't going to be tapped on the shoulder by the President of the United States to sit on the bench. So let's talk a little bit about the journey that you went on to get to where you are today. And then I'm going to backstep a little bit about law school in general. But let's talk a little bit about that journey and what you did to be able to prepare yourself well to move into where you are today.
When I left law school, I was a law clerk for what was then considered the oldest law firm in the state of Michigan. And I was told when I got the job that only Harvard, Michigan graduates would be hired, and I would be only their law clerk until I graduated. Well, I was lucky enough to be hired by that firm, and they had defended doctors in hospitals since 1891, and I started doing that. And in 1969, my then partner, Richard Kitch, and myself left that firm and started our own firm. And we specialized in medical legal defense work. By 1984, I had approximately 75 lawyers working for us and about 150 employees. So we had become very successful. I also was somewhat political in the sense that I contributed to the Republican Party, and candidly, if you ever want to be a judge, you have to be political, somewhat. I did not run for office, and I was not a precinct delegate or anything like that. My entire contribution was donations. In 1984, I was lucky enough that Ronald Reagan appointed me to the United States District Court, and in 1990, George Bush appointed me to the United States Court of Appeals, and I am currently a senior judge at the United States Court of Appeals.
Now, in all of those experiences that you have had and in the time that you've had on the bench, Are there things that now that you have been on the bench for as long as you have, if a student came to you and said, what are some things that I should be doing in law school to prepare myself to be a competent lawyer, a quality lawyer? You mentioned read, but are there other things that you will say to those students on a regular basis that would come to you for advice?
Well, first of all, I think any person interested in law had better spend some time thinking about why they want to be a lawyer. It's a very time-consuming and difficult field. The old saying, the law is a jealous mistress, is absolutely true. You're going to give up much of your family life, and you're going to be wed to your practice because, after all, you have decided by being a lawyer to take on the troubles or the benefits of your clients. And as such, you owe them before you owe anyone else. And so you have to really think first, why do I want to be a lawyer? Am I willing to give up the time to do so? And it takes a lot of time. Besides being very lucky, I think you have to learn some basics. It's always good to be mannerly, to know what the correct fork to use, what the correct procedure in getting off an elevator should be. All of these things, people are watching you. You're a lawyer, and they expect the very best from you. And so you have to learn those things. If you do trial work, as I did, you have to be, when you walk into a courtroom, the most prepared person about that case of anyone in that courtroom. Judge, your opposing counsel, even the litigants. You better know more than they do about that case. And that shows you, at least, that there is no substitute for just plain hard work. You don't become divinely inspired as to what questions to ask people. You learn what questions to ask people by your preparation.
Now, I know at the beginning of our interview today, one of the first things you said was read, and that you spend a lot of time reading. And are there specific books that you might recommend to people coming into law school or people going through law school that everyone should read as something that would prepare them well for the profession?
I don't think so. I think I've had law students, and I've taught some in the past, who have indicated as they rate the teacher, namely me, and say there's too much reading in the course. Well, that person should never be in law school. That isn't a criticism. So you have to enjoy the written word, because a fair amount of the law is going to be writing and reading anyway. When I talk about being the best prepared in my field, it was medical legal. I had to read medical records. I had to read books on how to do surgery and other things. There's no particular book you can find that says that, but I think you have to enjoy reading. And I think if I were telling a young person that wanted to go to law school, I'd probably tell them to take a business curriculum with most of my classes not related to business. I would take in some form of writing.
Now, I know you said that there's a lot of balancing that you have to do as a lawyer to be able to not only represent your clients well, but also to have a life outside of the law as well. You've been in your career for many years. How have you managed that, and how would you tell other lawyers or people that want to be lawyers to best be able to manage that balance within their personal and professional life?
Marry well. I say that not to be amusing. You have to have a spouse that is understanding of the time commitment. You have to have a spouse that is willing to fulfill and get involved in maybe more than most in raising the children. So that becomes number one. Number two, you do have to set some limitations on what you can do in work, and you do have to decide what are the important things that you have to be present at when you have children. And I think I always try to keep Sundays open, if nothing else, and being a person of faith, I think you start out with church and then you devote your day particularly to your children.
Now, I know that you have been in contact with a lot of different students over your career. You've had people that have probably come and spent some time with you in your chambers, but possibly also worked for you in different ways. And as you said, you have taught as well, and you still teach. Are there things that you have seen in students that are coming into law school right now that are either concerning for you or things that other people that are coming into law school should be aware of that they should be working on now to prepare for law school?
Well, I think if you're in law school or decide that's what you're going to do, I think you have to immerse yourself into the law. If you're dating or something, there are plenty of movies about the law. Rent them, and that's what you watch on some evening. Judgment in Nuremberg and Hair at the Wind, or some of those. Have your mind thinking about the law all the time. If you're just reading for yourself, there are any number of books, To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, and others that get you thinking about just being a lawyer. One of the things I do find disturbing is, and this is nothing about the student, it's something about the law school, and that is we're seeing that law is taught a bit differently than it was when I went to law school. When I went to law school, you got a case book with virtually no author's comments. You just read cases, and then through the Socratic method, the instructor, professor, teacher would pull out the things that he thought you should know and think about. And that way you got to understand both sides of the legal problem. Today, the books are more like textbooks where the author writes what he thinks the law is and then uses a case to demonstrate it. And then they talk about what he has written. And the result has been that my current law clerks are more rule-oriented and less of a thinking person than they used to be. And I'm talking about all kinds of law schools from Harvard on down. They're more concerned with sort of Blackstone on commentaries on the law than they are on how the law got the way it is and what's good, what's bad about what they're doing, or how to figure out what the problem is. That's the key to understanding law, is to figure out what the problem is.
Now, if a student is in law school, they're entering a law school, and they find that they are not getting that type of education, and they're not feeling like they're getting what you just said out of their what they're hearing or what they're learning in their classes, are there other things that they can be doing to get to the point where they have a better feel for the law, where it came from, and not just the rules, like you were saying?
Quite simply, one of the things they ought to start thinking about is, even if the author and your professor want to talk about why the plaintiff won, you should also be thinking about what is it the defendant was doing. Why did he do it? Did he think this was indeed a defense? Was it a recognized defense? How did he present it? What went wrong? In other words, you're going to have to take it on yourself somewhat to think about the other side of the case. But think about it, because that person is represented by an attorney who went to law school, just like the winner had an attorney that went to law school. They both have ideas as to why the law ought to be the way they are advocating. And so think about the other side.
Now, I want to go into one of the cases that I know that you worked on earlier in your career. Back in 2005, you were the opinion writer on ACLU versus Mercer County. And I know that brought you some attention based on the case itself. We don't have to delve specifically into that case, but I guess the question that I want to get at here is, when you have a case in your career that is of large stature, and whether you're a judge or you're a lawyer or, in you get that notoriety and people see you in that way and they start to react to you in that way based on an opinion or based on the case itself. How do you deal with that media attention? How do you deal with the notoriety that can sometimes come with being a lawyer and being in some high-profile cases?
Well, as a judge, I have no problem dealing with the media or because I don't talk to them. And it's not my role to advocate, it's my role to decide. So I think the most famous thing that ever happened to me was I said that I thought John DeLorean, who had the DeLorean automobile, was unworthy of belief, and that made national news. And I happened to be visiting my uncle in southern Indiana, and we went to a little coffee shop that all the farmers and he went to every day at noon, and he introduced me as the man who had called the DeLorean unworthy of belief. That was the most public accolades that I have ever received.
I love that. As you now are on the bench on the Court of Appeals, let's go behind the scenes a little bit. And because I don't know that everyone truly knows what someone at that level in the court system does and how they will analyze cases, how they will deal with cases. So walk me through the process of a case. A case comes to the court. It makes its way to the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. And what happens then?
Well, first of all, I think you have to understand we're a court created by the Constitution. We're all called Article III judges, which means the president appoints us for life and the Senate confirms that appointment. And so our jurisdiction is limited, unlike the jurisdiction of a state judge who has unlimited jurisdiction. He can decide anything that comes before him. But we can only decide those things that the Constitution says we can decide, in effect. Over the years, and I mean hundreds of years, the courts have taken on more and more power by virtue of defining what that jurisdiction is. So we have limited jurisdiction, but who decides that limitation is the courts. And so we're getting broader and broader, and frankly, I think it's a problem for democracy. We should be frightened of the courts. Now a case comes in like Mercer. This is a particularly good case. This is a Supreme Court case. This involves the First Amendment. This is no question. This is something a federal court should deal with. Just prior to this case, the Supreme Court ruled that the Ten Commandments could not be placed in a park in Kentucky because they said it demonstrated that the government was endorsing a religion. Well, of course, the Constitution doesn't say that a state can't endorse a religion. It just says Congress can't endorse a religion. But besides that, the courts have taken that limitation away and expanded it to the state. Then the Mercer case comes up, which is a county right next to the county the Supreme Court said could not have the Ten Commandments. And they had the Ten Commandments, but they did it with a lot of other founders and makers of law, Moses being one, other historical figures being the other. And that was an exception. And that was the difference that my case allowed the Ten Commandments. The ACLU, of course, fights for any mention of religion anywhere. But you see how silly this becomes. On one county, you can't have the Ten Commandments, and the adjacent county, you can have the Ten Commandments. Now, sure, it may make some slight differences to how the Ten Commandments got there. But if, in fact, these commandments are somehow evil or going to destroy the reader, they're going to destroy the reader in Mercer County as well as they are the county next to them. So it's a a lot of law created by the Supreme Court is unusual.
Now, this has been great, and I really appreciate you sharing all of this information. As we finish up today, one of the things that I always like to do is to open up the mic to you to allow for you to be able to give any final thoughts, hints, tips, any parting pieces of wisdom that you might want to share to the student that may be coming into law school or going through law school at this point.
Well, I think being a lawyer is a great thing. You have great responsibility, you do interesting work, and you are carrying forth society in different ways than social scientists do. When I reflect on my career, I've had a fair amount of success. I built a firm. I created the Sisters of Mercy Health Corporation. I tried numerous cases for big named hospitals and physicians. I'm on the United States Court of Appeals. I met Ronald Reagan. I met George Bush. These are all great things. But when I look back on my career, what is it I think most of? And it's just simply that, my God, I'm a lawyer. And that should be something to you, too, if you want to go in this field. I hope 20 years from now you look back and regardless of your career, say, my God, I'm a lawyer.
Well, I really appreciate you being with us today, sharing these thoughts and these words of wisdom. I have always appreciated the times that we've been able to share together, and I appreciate the time today. And I know that everyone that is listening today, you are going to be really listen to what Judge Suhrheinrich is saying and take it to heart. Start to read, and to really set yourself apart, to be able to set yourself up for success. So, Judge Suhrheinrich, thank you so much again for being on the show this week.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was another great guest this week on the Law School Insider. If you have an interest in being a guest on the show, drop me an email at lawschoolinsider@cooley.edu. And thank you all for listening today. And remember, you have the ability and right to take control of your law school's success. I hope you'll continue listening, creating a plan for success that will prepare you to achieve the dreams that you have set for yourself. Talk to you next time. Thanks for listening. You're on your way to being a law school insider.